The last time we were together, we talked about our priorities, and that our first priority was to ensure that we found a way for all of our students, grades pre-K to 12, to come back to school, and to ensure that they got the best shot at getting a great education, which we know and no one refutes, would be in person. That was our first priority. We communicated to you that our second priority was to ensure that by the time cold and flu season came around, that we had a better approach to learning continuity, that we put the technology in place, that we put the teacher training in place, that we put the student orientation in place to ensure that if November rolled around and we needed to shut down on Tuesday, by Wednesday morning, we'd be back up and ready virtually to make that happen. Some of those pieces have already fallen into place as we've purchased the materials, the Chromebooks for each kid to have a device, the mobile hotspots to ensure that every family has access to high-speed internet to make that work. Cameras in the classroom so that kids can see their teachers in their spaces, and a way to learn through all of that technology. That's evolving. We're not there yet. Our teachers don't come back to Monday, so we haven't started the process of training them to be effective in that way. But that was our second priority, and we're working through that. Then our third priority was to ensure that we had some type of remote learning plan in the interim, should something happen that would cause us to have to close schools sooner than November, or to accommodate those families who say, I've heard you, I do believe that you're doing your level best to make people safe, but in truth, I'm not interested in sending my child to school or anywhere else. Consider it. So we wanted to have a plan for that. In the meantime, we've seen a surge in COVID-19 cases in St. Louis County, such that our initial plan became non-viable. We reached a place where 3 feet of distance between desks in the classroom was no longer a tolerable situation. As you probably know from watching the news and reading the newspaper, a number of schools in St. Louis and St. Louis County made the decision to not open any of their schools until they saw some drastic reduction. Most of those schools, I will say for the record, were planning hybrid types of openings for their students. They went from hybrid to no opening at all. As we considered what was at stake, we too made a decision that we are no longer in a position to bring back all of our students pre-K to 12 in a way that honored the guidelines set by the American Academy of Pediatrics of 3 feet of distance between desks. That if we were ever going to bring kids back under the current circumstances, the current level of transmission, that we needed to get to CDC guidelines, 6 feet of distancing. And so as we talked about who, if anyone, we might bring back to school under those circumstances, it became clear to us that the most vulnerable population we serve are our younger students. Those kids for whom, if we asked them at age 5 to log on to a computer, to click on the right Zoom link, to pay attention for the next 3 or 4 hours to the teacher who's trying to teach you reading through the computer, that we would have to write off learning for those students for the foreseeable future. This is after they've already lost more than half a year of learning throughout the spring and the summer. And so we made the recommendation then to return pre-kindergarten to 4th grade students to classes starting September 8th, with a focus on English language arts and mathematics to ensure that our kids had the best jump start on being able to read, write, and compute. Students will get instruction in the classroom for half a day. They'll get academic enrichment in the classroom for half a day. We'll be able to say to our parents across our pre-K to 4 spaces that we will provide a full day of instruction for our students that won't cause parents to have to interrupt their workday because their child has been at school. That doesn't mean, though, because we are offering pre-K to 4 instruction, that everyone will take advantage of that in person. Some of our families, we believe, will still elect for some type of remote or virtual option, even if they have the ability to send their kids back to school right now. We honor and respect that, and we'll absolutely be able to accommodate those students. For our 5th through 12th graders, we are going to be working with our teachers for the next 3 weeks to prepare them to deliver instruction virtually. I will say to you just tangentially that that doesn't quite make me comfortable either. Our 5th through 8th graders need us to. Our high school students need us to. But the science is not necessarily on our side in this regard. Certainly, I think there's an argument that kids under 10 are not transmitters of the virus the way adults are. That's less decisive when we start talking about older students. So we'll bring back the younger kids first. We'll put them through their paces in a socially distanced way. And then the lessons we learn from that will help us understand the point at which we can start to cycle in older students. Because we do know there is a desire for all of our students, from some large contingency of our students to attend school in person. So we're gonna start pre-K to 4 in person with the option of being virtual. We don't have an update as it pertains to how we're gonna move logistically, because most of those things we wrote out to you in our last meeting relative to how we were gonna handle sanitizing spaces, how we're gonna handle tiered busing. What's different now is we are looking at 6 feet of distance. And you might ask the question, how do you get to 6 feet of distance in August when you couldn't get there in July? That's powerful. Take Lucas Crossing Complex, this building we're in right now. We will only have less than half of the students in this building that regularly attend classes here. So we were able then to take a 1st grade class and stretch them out over 2 rooms where they would have occupied 1. That's how we get to 6 feet of distance. Should we get to a point where we start to bring back 5th through 8th graders, we will likely have to borrow square footage from other facilities within our footprint to make that work. We've already done the outreach to ensure that if this model works and we can make sure that transmission is not expanding, that we have spaces to grow in where we can do the same thing with 5th graders, the same thing with 6th graders. And so that group of 1st graders stretched across 2 classrooms in this building will see their teacher, perhaps the 1st group, let's call them the A group. They'll see their teacher in the morning. They'll get that English language arts instruction and mathematics instruction. They'll have lunch in the classroom. And in the afternoon, they'll see a different teacher who will rotate to them to make sure that they get their academic enrichment. We're keeping kids clustered in small cohorts to make sure that they're not cycling through spaces with other kids. Should we see an incident of COVID-19, we'll be able to track it more closely because we know the kids are in small, tight, close-knit groups. Group B then starts with academic enrichment in the morning. They have lunch in their classroom, and then in the afternoon, their teacher comes in for that English language arts instruction and that mathematics. And they get a full day back on the buses, and then they go back home. That's the pivot from our last conversation to now. We're taking a smaller group of our kids, we're stretching them out over a greater square footage in our building to create social distance. And we believe do our level best to deliver on what we should be able to do, which is to teach kids in the 23 municipalities that serve Normandy Schools Collaborative to read effectively, to write persuasively, and to compute at a level that prepares them for high-level mathematics. That's the update I want to give you relative to what's been happening. We're so very fortunate to have a special guest with us this evening who is not just a pediatrician, but also an expert in infectious diseases. Sharifa, I'm now concerned, oh, you're showing this up, but do we have the ability to project for Dr. Newland? Splendid. And so, Phil, did you want to introduce Dr. Newland?
Yeah, Dr. Jason Newland, we're happy to have.
I'm good. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Jason Newland. I'm a pediatric infectious diseases physician up at Washington University and St. Louis Children's Hospital. I'm super excited to be here with you today and really respect and very much impressed with your leadership and what they're having and their watching of the science and what's going on. I just like to make a few comments and then be here to answer questions for you all. So that you have someone here that'll be honest and have the conversations and who's spent a lot of time in this data. So I just want to talk a couple of things. Number one, you know, you hear a lot of different names for this virus. You've heard COVID-19, you've heard all this different stuff, and this is just us infectious disease people trying to keep everybody on their toes. The virus's name is actually this severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, also known as SARS-CoV-2. That's the name of the virus. And that virus causes an infection or an illness called COVID-19 or coronavirus infectious diseases 19. You've probably heard of people refer to it as the novel coronavirus or COVID-19, but the point is that that's the infection. And the virus is the SARS-CoV-2. This virus has a couple of cousins that appeared in the world, one in 2002 called SARS-CoV, causes some really severe disease, but was limited as close as it got to the United States was Toronto, Canada. And then another virus, another cousin called Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus, or MERS-CoV. Those viruses weren't as smart as this virus because those viruses had a lot higher fatality rate. It killed a lot more people and wasn't able to kind of get into somebody and not cause any symptoms, and then spread it to a number of others. And that's what this current SARS-CoV-2 virus is doing. As you guys have probably know and heard that, you know, one of the challenges to this virus is the fact that I could have it and not show any symptoms and then be out in public and potentially spread it as an adult. And that's caused some pretty much challenges to all of us. Hence why we now walk around in masks. We practice social distancing. We wash our hands more than we've ever washed our hands, or some would say we're washing our hands like we've always should have washed our hands. And we're not going out when we're sick, and we're staying in because any sorts of illness could be this virus. Now, a couple of other important things about this virus I want you all to know is that, let's say like I'm sick and I decide I'm going to come up and see Mr. Robinson and want to come and look at Normandy schools. You know, if I come in contact with Mr. Robinson and we're not wearing masks, now, Mr. Robinson, we have a good 15, 20-minute conversations about next steps. He's going to be likely have symptoms within 5 to 7 days. That's the average amount of time, but he could develop symptoms up to 14 days. And so this is something that's important about the virus, is that when you come in contact with the virus, you're going to develop symptoms if you show symptoms within 2 to 14 days, but on average, it's 5 to 7 days. So that's why you'll hear that if you get exposed to the virus and someone says you've been exposed, and maybe some of you had, and maybe some of you actually had this virus and you've already had to deal with some of these, is that if you're exposed, you need to be quarantined or away from people for 14 days because we know you can develop symptoms in those times. Now, many of you have learned about the testing. The testing has been obviously problematic in many parts of our city, and it's been very troubling at times. And I think as we get more testing, that'll be better. But I think, you know, testing has been mainly for those who have symptoms. And that gets into what kind of symptoms can you have? Well, there's a few things. If you're an adult, there's 3 common symptoms. The most common is fever, cough, and shortness of breath. That occurs in probably 70% of adults. And when we talk about the fever, we're giving it a number. This fever is 100.4 degrees or higher. That's the fever whether you're an adult or a child. Now, in a kid, the children have decided to make this even more interesting, is that we have a number of different symptoms. And when we've had our own pediatricians in our community look at 75 of the patients that had COVID-19, so these children tested positive. First off, we know that most likely it's their older, the teenagers, it's the 14-year-olds, which I'd say are kind of in between the adults and the little ones in causing and what the symptoms is. And what the symptoms we see, the most common are cough, congestion, and fever, but those only occur in about 50% of the time. And then we also see loss of taste or smell. We see nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. We see muscle aches, we see headache, we see sore throat. That also can be seen in adult, but it seems to be a little bit more variable when it comes to children. And we also know that when children get sick, most of them, large portion of them do absolutely fine. They get better fast, they do well. I mean, that has definitely been reassuring. And so we continue to watch that and see what happens there. We have, I think the next thing is about how this virus is transmitted. And I think Mr. Robinson really discussed this better than I could. I almost should bring you along with me, Mr. Robinson, to give some of the talks I'm giving. You did such a great job. But as we've learned in the younger children, those less than 10, the transmission is less. It is definitely less. And how do we know that? Why would I say that? Because many of you, I was on a call with some other individuals, says, look, man, I know for a fact a whole family of people had the illness from, and it seemed to be children to children. That's true. You can see that. But when we look at household studies and we look at, okay, who's the first person in the household to be infected, or what we would call the index case, over 80% of the time, it's an adult. So it's us, right? It's us being out and about, being around more, and then we bring it into our homes, and we're the ones that usually give it to children. Now, the percentage of time that an adult in a household will give it to a child less than 10 is about 4 to 5%. So most of the time, you're not going to see it even happen. And so that also shows these kids just don't get it as much. And that's kind of what we've seen with our data. Additionally, now let's play the opposite side. Now, kids can definitely get it first. And so we've actually looked at this, and others have looked at this, that of the 4 or 5 households that we've seen in our own community, when we take the less than 10-year-olds and they're the first ones in and we see how it transmits, it just doesn't transmit it as well to the other adults. It only occurs in about 5% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just doesn't, it seems to happen much rarer. And these children are symptomatic. We have no reports in the children less than 10 that we've seen the asymptomatic child spread it to the adults. So that, to me, with what we're seeing in the community, makes me really impressed with your leadership, with this notion that we know some of our most vulnerable children are those in kindergarten through 4th grade. And this is a group that's safe to go back. No doubt, I'm one that thinks we can get them all back in eventually, but for sure right now with what we're seeing, kindergarten through 4th grade is a very safe for not only the students, but for the staff and the educators. And I'm telling you, like, we know that an educator is not going to be able to teach well without feeling safe. And with the things being put in place, Mr. Robinson and his team says, hey, look, we're going to go to 6 feet. We're going to have masks. We're going to have masks with our teachers. We're going to be talking about masks for our younger students even. It might not be all the time. We'll have the pods. I mean, and 6 feet and the distancing. I mean, this is ideal for getting our kids back into school where they should be, where they get the most support. They help you all out. Now, this is my thing. I think this is where I am right now, but I completely respect anybody, just like Mr. Robinson, the team has stated, that if you're saying, heck, I'm just not ready. I want my kids to be virtual. I understand that. And I don't blame you one bit. And I'm there to support you in that endeavor. As we all know, I mean, look, I thought school was amazing. I think what's being done is amazing. And these are the things that I want to support. I want to be there right alongside you and your team, your students, your teachers, to help as you move forward. I'd say in my last kind of brief comments, what we need to make this even safer is for all of this, the 92 wonderful individuals who are dedicating a Thursday evening to, because it's about their kids. And so you're already putting your children first. You're putting the children you care for first. We need to convince our community leaders. We need to convince other people that they should put our children first. And what does that mean? Well, that means we shut down bars right now. We shut down large gathering places. That means we talk about these sky zones, these other places where we're having a lot of congregations. We say this is the time not to have those. because we need to put our kids first. We need to do more to drive the community transmission down. So not only can the K through 4 be in school safe and even safer, because it only gets safer, but then we also can get our 5th through 12 in, and now they can benefit, because we all know, I mean, we worry about some of the psychological impact, the things that they're missing out on, and in a time that's so critical for all of these children. And so I would just say that in the end, let's all band together. Let's be together as a community and really push. Let's push for what's needed to be done to really make things safer. And so I'll end there, and I'm happy to answer all questions. If you have anything you want to say, like you don't agree, whatever, I'd love to hear it all, because I'm here to learn from you as well as to provide the information for you. I am not hearing anything. And I'm happy to answer things in the chat box if they want to do that. Oh, I didn't hear that. Oh, Mr. Whaley.
I'm echoing through someone's microphone. If I understand your question, it is what is the access to remote learning if I'm working a full-time job and cannot facilitate my child being on a computer at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning? Don't know that I have a great answer to that right now, as we're still building that out. And so one of the first things I think we're trying to get after is, what does it mean to deliver a teacher at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning? That's one platform. The other is, what does it mean to deliver something else, where you would say after 5 work virtually with your child? And I know Superintendent Clark Scott is working on that kind of solution as well. So let's just be in touch and communicate to figure out how that works. I would say, though, I'm making a distinction here. I think at 8 or 9 o'clock, we might be talking about a teacher driving. Post 5 o'clock, we're probably talking about a parent driving. And so there probably wouldn't be a whole lot of supports beyond that, not that we've thought of today. Yes, ma'am. Other thoughts and questions? I want to put in a plug in for Dr. Newland, because first of all, hats off to Dr. Pusateri for saying that what I've been saying for months, which is we are teachers and we are not doctors. And because I've been saying that, Dr. Pusateri has been out saying that we need to talk to doctors. And it's one thing to say, well, I wouldn't talk to somebody with the medical school and he works on feet, but he's a really bright guy. But Dr. Newland is a pediatrician, and he's not just a pediatrician, but a pediatrician dealing in infectious diseases who's been studying this deadly virus for the better part of the last half year, even as it was rolling over from China and hadn't quite ravaged the United States at that point. In addition, he's a pediatrician who's an infectious disease doctor at St. Louis Children's Hospital, affiliated with Washington University, one of the greatest learning institutions on the planet, one of the best children's hospitals in the entire country. So I'm grateful for Phil introducing us. I'm grateful for Dr. Newland at the last moment choosing to be a part of this. So if you have a question for us about what we're planning, happy to take that. Dr. Newland's also prepared to hear from you as well if you have specific questions of a medical nature. Michelle.
My question is, I chose first. So I have 3 kids that are enrolled in school.
Yes, ma'am.
What are they going to do about I have two.
Yeah.
One child needs. And I have internet access.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think it's gonna hold up for a full day of learning for the kids. Or they're gonna supply them with internet access so they can do their school.
So through a variety of grants and budget allocations, we are now able to go one-to-one with all of our students. In the spring, it was our intention to at least deliver one device per household. Now we're able to deliver one device per student. For families who communicate to us that access to the internet is a problem, we will have mobile hotspots available that you can take to your home and bring internet service to your house to work those devices. I'm sorry?
So I'm trying to figure out, I understand what you said, but at this present time, with the internet, do you have enough?
We do.
for everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We got you covered.
And how do I do it?
We'll let you know. There'll be a distribution before school opens on September 8th.
Okay, and also with the enrollment process, I fill out all my paperwork and everything. Now, since they're already been doing this, I don't know, 5 years, do I have to bring in birth certificates and all that stuff again?
You should not have to do, you shouldn't do that. We do ask that you go online and complete the registration process because that's helping us understand who's choosing virtual versus not. But if you've done the registration process, you should be done. But call our office if you have questions and we'll go in the system and verify that for you. All right? Other questions for me or for Dr. Newland?
My question was, like what she said, my son, I told him, and will, on virtual as well. My biggest thing is like, will he also have like more time on work and things like that, because I work at a nursing home, I work at a hospital, and I'm not at home and no one at home. So it's just him there. So how am I gonna be able to make sure that everything is done properly, one time, things like that? Is it gonna be time limit? She's gonna be calling me something like, he is this, he is that,
Yeah.
like, how am I able to, get that part?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're asking a really great question, which is, I will. For our students who are virtual, will their academics be time bound? Will the kids be penalized if they haven't completed their lessons in a particular amount of time, particularly if they have parents who have day commitments that would preclude them from being there to police that work? And then there was another question that I think I heard in that, which was, how will the teachers be moving on some of these issues? How will they take into account whether or not someone is working? And so I think my first response is, this is why we've felt like for pre-K to 4, we needed to open in person, because we have so many parents who are in that boat where they cannot manage all of those situations. We still know that we've got a similar problem, 5'8". They might be taller, but not necessarily more mature. And so we'll be working through that as well. What grade, I'm sorry, did you say your child was? In the 7th grade. So even at grade 7, we'll be narrowing our academic focus to really be trying to push through on English language arts and mathematics. So the scope of the work that they have to do is a bit narrower as opposed to if we were sitting in person for middle school. However, they will have to be accountable because a class is moving forward. And so one of the things that we talked about today is what are going to be the stop gaps when we notice mom's at work, child's supposed to be moving on this work, but hasn't logged on like she's supposed to. What is our response going to be in order to jumpstart that process of getting that child moving? Today, I don't have that answer, but I want you to know that that's something that we're taking into consideration. And it's also the thing that just burns in my soul around how we think about middle school, because I feel about middle school like you feel about middle school. I have to go to work. I got a fourth grader, for instance, who goes to a school that is now all virtual and left to his own devices. If I'm at Normandy, he's sitting at home, nothing's getting accomplished. I'm not talking about your child, I'm talking about mine. And so under the circumstances, I've got to either bring him to Normandy with me if I really want him to stay on track, or I got to find a different school for him to go to because he's just not that kid. And so if I'm in that boat with 3 college degrees, then I know a whole bunch of us are in that boat. And so that's why we sit and we have a conversation. Okay, today is pre-K to 4. How long do we wait before it's 5 to 8? Because we may get to a point where the 5th through 8th graders aren't moving because they don't have enough accountability, because they're locked out of school. That's not to say that even if we made that decision somewhere around second or third week in September, that we still wouldn't offer a virtual option for families who want and need that, right? So as long as people feel like they need that in this pandemic, we'll keep doing that. But that's the thing we're trying to move on, to come up with, to answer the questions that you just put on the table. I think that's really important.
Okay. That's one other thing that I had a problem with. He would be online and it would say that it's ended, like, the window is not open, and I screenshot it and sent it to the teacher, let them know that I'm sitting here right here with them.
Yeah.
I did it at 9 o'clock, so coming on live, coming on,
Yes.
university on at 9 o'clock, and I
Yes.
do it, and she doesn't pop up.
Yes.
So she probably trying to be upset at me because she's not on there, but I screenshot and show you that it's not coming on. I don't understand why they.
I'm not going to jump up and shout because I agree with you. But I think you're highlighting a very important issue. The question is, what happens when the child has made a good faith effort to log on, gets to a link that is not allowing them to access whatever the portal is to be able to be present for the lesson. And what you're highlighting right now is we had to send people home because the county was shutting down our buildings without giving our teachers the capacity to work through these issues. I, as a professional, am frequently in a position where I am trying to log on to a Zoom meeting and I have a stale link. That's the link from last week. And so I'm sitting and waiting to get into a meeting that is not happening. And somebody has to email me the fresh link so I can get into that. Or I'm waiting to get into the meeting, and because I wasn't right there at 8 o'clock when they were looking, they have their thing set up to admit people to the meeting. Now I'm not being admitted because this person is now talking and not paying attention to the fact that there are people in the waiting room trying to get into the meeting. So there's human error baked in, Mom, because we just haven't invested the time in training and orientation that we need to. And so when we start talking about virtual learning, I think the thing we have to be really honest about is there's a learning gap for teachers to get on top of technology, to not only understand how to use the technology, but to teach through the technology. Not only learn to teach through the technology, but hold kids accountable and really be able to do real authentic assessment to see whether or not kids are growing through the technology. And so I tend to be uncomfortable because I know how much I don't know. And I know how much my colleagues will be struggling with in this regard, right? And so I say you did the absolute right thing. My child was right where he needed to be. I screenshotted this. I showed what link he was trying to access. I showed the error message, and I'm done. I'm not gonna sit here for an hour trying to figure out why your technology doesn't work, right? And so we'll be working through how to train our teachers to give you better information, to give kids quicker access, and to make sure that when you run into blips on the radar screen, that we can respond to that. Right here, Michelle.
I've got 2 minutes. The first one is you can put this equipment, or they come to the deposits on these hotspot boxes, these Chromebooks, like we're doing the summer. So that's my next one. I've got a grandson.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to get him in special school district because it would be a better platform.
Mm-hmm.
With everything going on, our activities
All right, so the two questions were, first, will there be a charge for usage of devices? We were charging an insurance fee in the spring and summer for the devices. Thanks to Assistant Superintendent Clark Scott and Dr. Green, our Director of Technology, that's no longer the case. We'll be able to waive those fees and keep it moving. So you don't have to worry about that as a barrier. The second question was around access to special school district. And I will say that the federal law is the federal law, and the pandemic doesn't seem to waive that. If you're indicating, and you should indicate in writing, even if it's on the back of a napkin and lipstick, I am interested in having my child evaluated for special education services, then we owe you an obligation to act on that, even in the midst of a pandemic. I will ask that you please give it to somebody who looks important at least, right? Because we have a lot of people walking around. I wouldn't want you to have handed that to somebody who ultimately can't do anything with it. But I'm thinking your child's principal, assistant principal, someone you would. No stalemate. You write it down, you deliver it to either an administrator at the school, or you bring it to us at central office, and we'll get the wheels turning for you. Yes, sir.
I was also told in the summer, when the epidemic first started, that I had an option to do, receive a packet of work versus doing the computer work. And that's, I wanted a packet, but I guess at the last minute, his teacher was like, well, they said everybody will do virtual. I want to know, is that still an option, or at least in some work come home, or we, because I believe my son, he really needs to be here, but I have diabetes, he has asthma, so I'm just not really ready to take that risk. So I'm just, because over the summer, like I've been printing out work at, work for him to do at work, just to kind of keep the wheels turning, trying to make up this thing for him to do at home still. So he really needs to be here. And
So,
he has an IEP also.
Yeah. So, two things. First, the question was, folks who were promised earlier in the school year that if they did not want to access the virtual platform, that they would have access to print out packets that their students could complete. Would that be available for fall? The answer is probably not, and that's probably not a good way of handling that business because we hope post-pandemic, post-vaccine, when you do feel comfortable with your asthmatic child returning to school and not compromising you as someone with diabetes, I would say that we want your child to be exactly where the other children are and not on some different program. But the second thing I would say is if your child already qualifies for special services because of an exceptionality, then there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And I think the right thing to do is to sit down in case conference and then figure out what adjustments we need to be making and what modifications we need to be making under the circumstances versus trying to figure out how to navigate this other thing by yourself.
Have you all decided yet, and then you have, what time the students will be, well, I know there's no time to go to school, but will they be going to school Monday through Friday for the entire day, or will they be doing like switching out for certain time periods?
It's a really good question. So the question is, have we decided for 5 days in person or a hybrid, like an A-B schedule or a half-day schedule? And the decision is for pre-K to 4, we will be providing full day, 5-day a week in person education for those students. For 5th through 12th grade, all of those students will be virtual with the hope that if the COVID-19 transmissions continue to trend down and we get really good at social distancing in terms of instruction, food service, transportation, how we move kids through buildings, then the next wave of kids to come back would be 5th through 8th graders.
As far as once we start, September 8th.
September 8th, 5th through.
I know with my daughter, I'll be at work for the beginning half of the day.
Yeah.
And then it'll be a point where I'll have to leave work, switch out, whoever's watching her. So I don't know if it'll be a point where it'll be sort of her, she's in class at the time, so where she'll be able to leave class and then come back to the program where it'll be a day where they'll have a parent in the afternoon.
Yeah, and so I take your question to mean you're asking for our kids who are learning virtually, is their schedule worked out for the day? Such that, and I would say we haven't completely worked that out just yet. But I've now filed in my mind, we need to post that as soon as we have it.
My question is, with the IEPs and everything, I got sixth grader who has an IEP. And when she's in school, she gets time with her work one-on-one.
Yes.
So are they gonna offer one-on-one on Zoom or,
Yes, ma'am. So, I mean, the question is for all of our exceptional learners. Will they have access to the provisions in their IEP even when they're virtual? And the answer to that is, I think we have an incredible partner in Special School District. And I was with their superintendent virtually 2 weeks ago. We have a regional representative that is always with us. They have a contingency of kids who are going to have to come to school anyway because their exceptionalities are such that they cannot learn from home. So we'll find spaces for them. So my sense is everyone's IEP will be attended to. To the extent that you feel like it's not happening, let us know, because I know as soon as they know, they'll swing in to correct. Sure. If you don't mind, let's take a couple questions for Dr. Newland.
One question came from a teacher, and they wanted to know if they have heart issues, is it safe for them to return to school to teach? Do I need to unmute you? Let me see. Okay, hold on.
Okay, these are super important questions, right? So we know that there are different risk factors that put you at risk to having severe disease.
Hold on, I can't hear. We can't hear you. Say you're not muted. I don't know why. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Great question. We know there are certain conditions that put people at have an increased risk of having more severe disease if one would get COVID-19. One of those is type 2 diabetes. Another one is obesity. Heart disease has been associated and been seen with that. So can you teach school? Well, yes, you can. There are risks for you to have more severe disease, possibly depending on what that heart condition is. Hypertension is one that people say. You obviously have that risk by going out and these things. So what I say is that, I mean, obviously this is a decision you have to think through, maybe talk with your doctors, but there are things in place to decrease this transmission. So, right, we're wearing our masks, we're washing our hands, we're doing the physical distancing. As a teacher, I know, like, this is like, you're like, man, this is hard at times to do the physical distancing, and we can keep the 6 feet. It doesn't mean that you have to be 6 feet every second of the day. There could be a time where you need to go a little closer to your second or third grade student and help them for a second, but then you can go back and be with your distance longer. Now, I didn't talk about this study when it comes to masking, but I just want you all to know of an important study that was done that was actually kind of in our backyard down in Springfield, Missouri. And maybe if any of you like to go on to CNN every once in a while or over Memorial Day, you might have seen that picture of all these crazy Looney Tunes at Lake of the Ozarks at that big old pool party. And we all were like, how could you do that? But if you looked like 3 lines down, there was this whole story about 2 hairdressers at a Great Clips in Springfield, Missouri, who had cut the hair of actually 139 individuals, and they had symptoms of COVID-19. Now, there's 2 important things to know about that story. Number one, is that while the hairdressers were cutting the other's hair for over 15 minutes within 6 feet, they all had masks on. The hairdresser had masks on, the clients had their masks on, and not one of the 139 got sick. Not one. Now, there was 2 of them, I told you, 2 hairdressers. Well, hairdresser A, back in the break room with hairdresser B, they weren't wearing masks. And guess what? They were back there for 20, 30 minutes. And yes, they gave each other, or one A gave it to B, and then A actually went home and gave it to all their household contacts. So the moral of this story is, number 1, masks work, even in the closed settings. And number 2, as teachers and as staff members and as me, even when I'm in the hospital, my greatest risk is likely not when I'm actually in front of a patient, because I'm all like focused in. It's when I'm outside in my break rooms, sitting there taking my mask off in those spaces and doing that. And so I think, 1, yes, you can teach, but I think you have to take that into account in this, because I think we can do things to be very safe. And remember, school is going to be, we're screening them. If they're sick, we're going to make sure they're out. Masking, distancing, hand washing. And I think these plans can make it safe for you. But I don't want to take this away. Like, look, if that's not ready and you want to talk, that is completely understandable.
One more question, Doc. From a parent, she says that her son has a weak immune system and he has already had COVID. Can he get it again?
Love the question. What we have learned, let's just talk about those people who have these immune systems and they say you're immunocompromised. Yeah, that you've already seen. It sounds like I'm assuming your son has done well with that based on this conversation. We have learned that a lot of our immune compromised children have done quite well if they've gotten COVID-19, meaning they haven't been in the hospital or haven't been in the hospital very long. We've had lung transplants. We take care of children that get transplanted lungs, so they're very immunocompromised, and they've done quite well with this disease. So number 1, just for any of those people that have this sort of situation, I think that doesn't mean you can't go to school. And I think you can, again, this is one, especially the immune compromised, talk with your doctors, talk with these individuals. They'll help you with that decision, depending on that. Now, for the specific question, because as infectious disease doctors, we just like to talk too much sometimes, but your specific question should know that we do not have any data that says that someone that's gotten COVID-19 in the current time frame has then got it again. Okay, that doesn't mean it couldn't happen later, but what it looks like is that there is some protection that someone's getting from that. But with that being said, since we don't know, we should all still be wearing masks, washing our hands, and doing social distancing, so we don't have to find that out with your son. I think it is going to be something we'll learn more about. And obviously, as Mr. Robinson said, man, we need to get to that vaccine period and then talk about that. And I just like to say, hey, we should all be, thinking about that next steps of how we're all going to get the vaccine once that's ready. And I think, we'll have more conversations about going forward.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Newland.
You're welcome.
for the purpose of the folks who are on the Zoom. The question was around what is an IEP and what should we do if we want to get that. The IEP then will lead to a series of diagnostics. Those diagnostics tend to include a battery of surveys and also an intelligence test. And generally, we're looking for a discrepancy between what a child should be able to do and what they're actually able to do to say that there's something that we need to accommodate. That's not the same thing as my child is behind, right? And so under the circumstances, we could have a child that really is 3 grade levels behind in reading, but would not qualify for an IEP because when we look at that person's IQ, that person can do exactly what their IQ says that they can do. There's no discrepancy. So then the answer there isn't leave them 3 grade levels behind. The answer there is we need a different kind of tutoring remediation to help them catch up because she doesn't qualify for services in this way. Nobody expects you to make that determination. You bring it to us and we'll help you figure out what the issue is. Bring them on in. Come see us.
One thing is, I got 2 questions. One thing, my children get to school bus.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I go to school bus sometimes.
Yes, sir.
Kids are wild.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how you're going to social distance in the school bus.
Yeah.
Okay, now, and my next thing is, heaven forbid, one of these kids, 12 to 4, catch COVID. All right, what happens to them?
Yeah. Good questions. First question was, what does social distancing look like on a school bus? The second question is, what happens if within a cohort of kids, there's a case of COVID-19? So the first question is, we were already increasing the number of tiers of buses to reduce the number of kids on buses already. We went from 2 tiers of buses, an A tier and a B tier, to 3 tiers. That then lightened the load on all our buses in such a way that we were able to say, hey, listen, we can pretty much count on kids not having to sit with somebody who's not in their household. Well, now that we don't have all of our kids coming back, the number is significantly less. We're talking about less than half of our students on our buses. And some of our students who would qualify to ride the bus are either A, gonna have parent transportation because they feel like, I don't want you on the bus, but I do want you to go to school. Or B, they're gonna be home learning virtually, which will allow us to load the bus from the back to the front and also be able to say, we have an even greater chance of making sure basically it's one kid on the bench, or if there are multiple kids on the bench, those kids live in the same household. And so that's the transportation. The second question is a little bit different around what happens if there's a child with a COVID transmission. And I won't go into a whole lot of detail. We kind of went through that last meeting, but I will say that our cohorts allow us then to identify that child was in room 203. And there are only 9 other kids who were in 203, right? And so we know who that child had exposure to be able to alert those families and to deal with whether or not we need to do quarantines or whether or not we need to do testing. We know the teachers who came into contact with that child in that particular room. So the way we're doing cohorts and distancing allows us to really segregate the access and exposure versus if we were bringing kids down here and 200 kids were in for lunch, or we have 200 kids out on the playground for recess, then it becomes a lot more complicated under those circumstances. But given the way that we're moving, we're limiting the contact of kids to other kids. If necessary, we shut a classroom down. If we saw that there was an incident there that concerned us and we think there's spread, if it happens to start spreading across the building, we shut the building down. So we have steps in place to respond to transmission as we see it. And because we're working in cohorts, we can track it more closely.
Is it possible to move classroom outside?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, sir.
Move classroom outside.
Is it possible to move the classrooms outside? That is a great question. as a former classroom teacher, I think about heat, I think about bees, I think about trying to teach under those circumstances. I can already see the little kids sweating and acting up. I think there is there's definitely conversation, and we've had it today, about the notion that kids do need to go outside. So what does that look like? If we're going to think about things like recess, if we're going to think about things like PE, how do you maintain social distancing outside? All of those things. I don't think at this juncture we're contemplating instruction outside. So we won't be teaching reading outside because we don't have the stuff that we need, right? And so the books, all the materials are in the classroom. That affords me the opportunity to say, though, in the classroom, those kids with their materials have their materials. There won't be a get up and go to the bookshelf and get a book. There's a book in your bin that belongs to you that only you touch. There are math manipulatives in your bin that only you touch. There is a Chromebook that belongs to you. It is assigned to you, only you touch it. And so within the context of the classroom, we're able to give kids essentially their own little bubble in which they operate. Yes, ma'am.
Unmute. Okay, this question, how do you maintain 6 feet of distance with the younger kids for which a portion of their in-person learning is social? I understand that provisions are set up for 6 feet spacing, but how do you manage to ensure the consistency of social distancing? I can possibly foresee kindergartners seeing their friends and immediately running to them at some point, given their full day when eating in the restroom, etc.
Yeah. So the thing we talked about in our meeting today was around how we orient kids to things like wearing a mask. Instead of just assuming, because I gave you a mask, you know, because I said you need to have it on. I mean, we need to practice. This is mask time. This is unmasked time. When we're 6 feet, you can take your mask off and breathe a little bit. I think the same thing is true about how they interact. We would then discourage them from running and hugging. But I think we would also be conscientious about the notion that when they have to be closer than 6 feet, that they are wearing a mask. When they have to be closer to us than 6 feet, that we're wearing a mask. And so we have literally thousands of masks in a variety of iterations, from KN95 to cloth to surgical to plexiglass face shields. And so when it comes to the type of protective equipment that are necessary to prevent transmission, we have it. And so I would say that, yeah, kids are gonna do what kids do unless we train them to do something different. And I've served kids from 5 years old up through undergraduate school. And I know for a fact when I had 34, 5 and 6 year olds from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, that unless I trained them, I could not count on them knowing to do anything, whether that's going to the bathroom or eating in a certain way or taking a nap or whatever I was required to do with those kids. And so if we go back to school like it's just going back to school, that's going to be a problem. But if we go back to school and the first thing we do is to start to train our children how to live in these smaller spaces, how to relate to each other and how to relate to us, then I think we're going to be in good shape.
I would add, if you don't.
Uh-oh. I think Dr. Newland wants to weigh in and we'll come back.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just add real quick.
Hold on 1 second, Jason. She's going to unmute you.
Sorry. I would just add that, you know, we have these young kids are going to do some of that. And as Mr. Robinson said, that, you know, there's going to be teaching to this. They're going to be able to do that. But we also got to remember that we're not going to be sending and we're not going to be having people in our buildings that have these illnesses that end up spreading it. So we're already doing one step before they even show up, as a lot of these kids there's not going to be any symptoms. And so a little bit of, you know, this time when they're a little bit inside that 6 feet while we're going to keep that, you know, maximize it, that's going to be okay in these younger kids, especially with what we know about the virus and especially about all the things that we're putting in place. So I think that, yeah, we're going to maximize it. We're going to do that. But, you know, look, 5-year-olds on the playground might run into each other and do a little hugging and running. And especially 5-year-old boys might be doing a little too much more tackling, though my 5-year-old girls probably would have tried to tackle anybody. So with all that being said, Yeah, there's going to be some of that time, but all the things being done already will keep us safe, our educators safe, because our educators will be in the mask all the time when they're around them. And it'll be a really exciting and wonderful thing to watch as these kids learn this and then actually still benefit from some of these other times. Sorry to interrupt that. Next question.
Thank you, Dr. Newland.
I'm just concerned because I watch CNN and there have been children eat eggs, they cook it. So, I mean, it's like,
I'm not hearing. Thanks.
So if I can reiterate the question really was, granddad over here is concerned. He watches the news, and from what he can see on CNN, there's just too much that we don't know. Why would we consent to experimentation with our children? And I would say to you that I think we would be uncomfortable with experimentation, that the decisions that we've made is based on the available science. I watch CNN, I watch too much MSNBC. Occasionally I slip and watch Fox News when I'm not paying attention. But I also spend 2 to 3 hours a week in a regional superintendent's meeting where we're hearing from public health officials. I also read a slew of studies and reports. And what I would say is the best evidence is that young kids are not being infected at the same rate and they're not transmitting at the same rate. I made the second distinction because the consideration that I have here is not just whether or not my kids will get sick, but whether my colleagues will get sick, right? Like I have a double duty of responsibility to ensure that we're not only protecting the safety interests of the kids, but the adults who serve them. And so I wouldn't be sitting before you with this plan if I didn't feel confident that based on what we currently know, that we're safe to do this. Now, I will say that some people have used the term, maybe overused the term, abundance of caution. And the thing that concerns me about saying, because we're not absolutely sure about whatever, that we should not make a decision is when we leave our kids at home, a number of kids lose in ways I can't even imagine. Some of it is about reading and some of it is about math, but some of it is about, for some of our kids, school is their public health intersection, right? I've got kids for whom their nurse is almost their primary caregiver. For some kids, their mental health, school is their intersection. It's the place where they actually get the therapy they need to weather the storm that they're in. We actually say the same thing about food instability. I know some kids who come to school here who receive services because they are homeless, and we accommodate their families in 4 or 5 different ways. And so we know that we have an academic burden that the kids are losing academically, and it'll take us years to make up for some of what kids have lost academically. But we also know that if we can't find a way to return kids to school, it's not that they're not being harmed at home. They are being harmed at home. And in this particular situation, we would say, unless we felt that they would be just as harmed at school, we shouldn't have kids at school. And I think what we would say is, we think the harm is less if they come to school than if we take this contingency of kids from age 4 to age 10 and leave them at home for the next half a year. And so that could change. As I said when we had a meeting in July, like the science evolves, the landscape shifts. And if it becomes clear that this thing is out of control, we're gonna shut it down. If it becomes clear that transmission in kids under 10 is significant, whether even with 6 feet of social distancing, then we'll shut it down. But the science doesn't seem to suggest that at this point, right? And so I just wanted you to know that I love our kids like I love the kids in my house, which is why I put the kids in my house potentially at risk to serve the kids in this district. Why I put my elderly mother, who I care for, at risk to serve the kids in this district. I know that they're losing big, and I'm trying to stop that loss. The thing that eats me up ultimately isn't that I feel like we're putting our kids at risk pre-K to 4. What eats me up is I'd love to do the same thing, raise 5 to 8, but I'm not sure the science is on my side as far as that's concerned, right? Because I'm seeing different things about transmission in older kids. Now, the thing that I'm wrestling with is, well, what if I create 6 feet of distance? Am I in good shape? I don't have a good answer to that yet, which is why I'm not sitting before you saying, in addition to pre-K to 4, we're gonna offer an in-person option for kids 5 to 8, right? And so I said all that to say that I would never sanction an experiment. I walk away from this job first. What I'm talking about right now is based on sound reason, sound judgment, based on my training as an educator and based on the training of Dr. Newland and people like him in the health profession to say, we think you're clear as far as this is concerned. Now, I think if I said, I want to bring back pre-K to 4 and 9 to 12, Dr. Newland would have a different perspective. He would have to say, hey, listen, with your 9th through 12th graders, you have a different set of concerns. Dr. Newland, why don't you weigh in?
Well, I need to take you on the road with me. I'm telling you, you said it really well. I am in the same way. I care for children in the hospital all the time. Any child that dies hurts all of us, hurts watching it. It hurts to know that even though it's rare, like I saw a number 0.6% of cases of children will have a fatality, that's still someone's loved one. It's low, right? And so I will tell you that I don't take that lightly. I don't take it lightly that we've seen an increase in in our teenagers getting more cases. That's why I press to say we got to do more as a society. But as Mr. Robinson said so eloquently, there is a calculation here we are making. There is a risk benefit that we have to take when it comes to children. We often put children second, third, fourth at the back of the line when it comes to our daily lives. I would say that we have to find that place where we're putting them first. And I think the decisions and looking at the negative consequences of not having in-person school, the food insecurity, the lack of educational development, as Mr. Robinson said. As a pediatrician, we are always on the lookout for child abuse and neglect, which during the pandemic has been decreased by 20%. Seen that throughout. Our education system is safety for kids as well. And so I would, in the same way, I would never experiment in this case. I think this is a time to band together, take the science we have. We know in our hospital systems that when people are getting sick in hospitals, it's because they're not wearing their mask around each other, and it's the workers that we're giving it to each other. And I think the same is going to be seen when we get into the schools, is that that's going to be our risk points. And I'll run through a wall for Mr. Robinson after being on this call and talking to him earlier, because I believe so strongly that this is the right move. This is a safe move. And in the end, this is what's going to benefit these kids for the rest of their lives. And they'll remember the pandemic, unlike some of their colleagues that they'll talk about in 10 years about, yeah, what did you guys do when you were in first grade? Well, I had to stay home and try to do this online. Now, they might be bragging about that, but we'll know that those who are able to be in person up front are going to benefit greatly. And so I am 1,000% in on this. And I think I appreciate the question. I think these are the questions we need to have and have to answer for all of you, so you know that we are right there with you, and we want to show that this is safe and the best for our kids.
Thank you for that question. It was great.
Okay, that was, you said that the virus won't be in the school, but what about the people that are asymptomatic, that don't show any symptoms? Then you got kids, you're dealing with kids, it's like playing Russian roulette. Because as an adult, you want to take it. So as kids, they're going to take it off. They don't take it off the mall, they're going to take it off the house to get some breathing. They're going to run and they're going to hug their friends, just as well as if she's in a pre-K, I think to the 5th grade, just as well as when we do get back. What about the teenagers? They don't run, they don't hug their friends, they don't care. But I understand that you said it's low with the kids, because we sheltered them. We didn't let them outside. They didn't go nowhere. They was in the house. So now we bring them into a school environment with other kids, with other adults, who don't do grocery shopping and everything else.
Yeah.
So if that asymptomatic, we don't know what they got. And then you pass it on to the kids. Like Governor Graham didn't like what he said. They don't get COVID, but they got to go back to school. They're not going to be in a hospital. They're going to be at home with you. You don't know everybody's life. You don't know if they're at home, at work. The kids will be sick. And then somebody who's out to take care of them.
So,
that's the big issue I think that all of us as parents are wondering about.
Yeah.
You're playing Russian roulette with the kids. It didn't work for the adults. They went out to the bar, come on, get on that, come on, get it.
so
They went all casinos and all this crap.
Right.
I mean, shut it down. The United States didn't have to sit down. Long time.
So I would say that we agree with most of what you said, that as a society, we have prioritized other things, whether that's gambling or getting to the liquor store. Sure. Sure. And so I would say that's absolutely the case. The thing I would take issue is this whole question of playing Russian roulette with kids, right? Because I want you to know that this sits with me 24 hours a day. It's the hardest decision I've ever had to make relative to doing what's easy, which is what's politically expedient. Let's be closed because everybody else is closed. Or doing what's right. I serve kids who need their school more than anybody else. And the data is clear about how much my kids need their school. And so under the circumstances, I'm here to tell you right now, I'd open for 100% of these kids if I could. But the science is not on my side. I don't believe if we brought our 9th through 12th graders back, I do think that would be Russian roulette. I think the data is different about little kids. And I hear you saying that you kept your little kids in. I don't live in that neighborhood because they were all over my neighborhood. Every day they were supposed to be in school, they were outside. And I will say to you, the lion's share of the kids, even that we gave devices to in the spring and in the summer, did not use those devices for learning. They did not show up in a virtual way to interact with that. That sits with me because that says to me then that, all right, we need to step up. I'm ignoring a text from my daughter who went to school today. I raised that issue because my daughter earned a scholarship to a private high school. and they went back to school. And so I feel less like I'm playing Russian roulette when I know the affluent people in this community sent their kids back to school. Even when, like my daughter, they're 14 years old. Socially distanced, of course, some type of hybrid learning model, of course, some kind of abbreviated content, of course, they went back to school. These are kids who need school the least because they've got and have had since March private tutoring, Sylvan, Kumon, social clubs, pools, access to athletic facilities, and the list goes on and on. But our kids in our community have pretty much been quarantined and sequestered. If we didn't teach them, then they didn't get anything. And that's not just true about us. That's true for a number of municipalities across our region. And so at some point, I'm not so much worried about like, how do I keep my virtual kids on track with my in-person kids? I'm worried about how I keep all of my kids on track with the kids they have to compete with in more affluent areas who have more money to spend on education, who don't care whether or not the school door's open because they're not counting on the school. And so I feel like as a teacher and an administrator, I carry a different burden into this work because I know that we have to be more than a school to our kids. Yes, we are reading and writing and arithmetic, but we're also college preparation and career training. We're also social and emotional development. We're also athletic development. We're also fine arts and performing arts and all the things that in some other communities, they don't care about because they don't need school for that. You ain't got a good arts program? I'll send my child to Coke and pay for it, no problem. You don't have a good athletics program? No sweat. I can pay for them to get golf lessons over here at this course or tennis lessons down here. Don't need you to have a good athletic program. If you're not teaching my child to read, I'm not concerned about that because we've got people who are experts in reading who will teach our children. And so I would never say to you, you should feel comfortable when you don't. That's not what I'm here to say tonight. I'm not trying to persuade you. If you don't feel comfortable, I'm here to say, I love you. I love your kids. If what you want is a virtual option, you got it. I'm just balancing that against a parent who says, yeah, I hear what she's saying, but I also hear that I have to go to work. And I also hear that after work, I have neither the energy nor the space of life to spend the next 6 hours teaching this baby. And I believe the science that says that these younger kids are not giving it to each other. And so I need an in-person option. Well, they're not just saying that in Normandy. They said it in Rockwood all over the news before they shut down all the Rockwood schools. The difference is the Rockwood parents in Chesterfield and Eureka have a different shot at getting their kids some academic support in ways that some of our families just don't have. We close up, then they're done. So our goal here isn't to make people feel something, comfortable with something that ultimately they won't. When you tell me I'm not ready, I believe you. I'm gonna work as hard as I can to give you as much as you can, because we believe you. But we're also saying, hey, look, there's another side of the story. We're gonna be attentive to that side of the story. We're gonna try to be as safe as we can to that side of the story. And hopefully, through working through those processes, you can say, okay, how are transmissions? Have y'all seen an uptick? Because I've been at this virtual thing for a month and a half, and I'm ready to think about making a move. At some point, somebody's got to step across that border. Throughout this region, every superintendent who's decided to go virtual for the first quarter is having one conversation, and that is, when can I open? And that's going to be a tough decision because they've already said it's too dangerous though. We think, we don't know. We closed because everybody else closed. And so under the circumstances, then there are kids who are going to be locked out for a considerable period of time because they don't have an answer to that question. They close without deciding what open looks like. And I'm not convinced that as a community, that's the right path for us. We may have to close. I can't promise you today, September 8th, there will be in-person school at Normandy Schools Collaborative, because that would mean in the next 3 weeks, I can predict what people's behavior is going to be. I can't. I just know that the way we're driven, we're going to drive toward that. And we're going to accommodate the people who want to come. We're going to accommodate the people who say, I'm not ready yet. But in none of these cases are we ever in a position to say, we're willing to put our babies at risk. We're willing to put us at risk. You see the people sitting before you are parents, kids and grandkids. We love them. And putting your child at risk means putting those children at risk. Because that means I'm going to get it at work, take it right on home. I'm not trying to kill those babies or my mama or this other lady I live with who happens to be my wife, who's also in education, who's also trying to fight the fight of how to serve the girls that she's responsible for in the best way she can during this pandemic. And so you're right to feel the way you feel, because to Granddad's point, the information is not consistent. And so if all I have at my disposal is CNN, because the St. Louis County Health Department is not doing what it's supposed to do. And as I said to the governor 2 weeks ago, the Missouri Health Department is not doing what it's supposed to do from a public health perspective. Now we have to sit back and guess. It's unacceptable. Amen. 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 And so because we don't have the public health sector from the federal level on down to the local level doing what they need to do, we're just blessed to have experts like Dr. Newland who are able to step up and say, I've been studying this for over half a year. Here's what the science says. I live in this every day, and this is what the science says. I cannot get a similar answer from the director of the St. Louis County Health Department. I cannot get any answer from the director of the Missouri Health Department. That's unacceptable, because they're looking at the same data Dr. Newland's looking at. And for political reasons, they're not answering the question on purpose. Know this. And so we're in this together, and we're not all going to choose the same path, and that's okay. But we're going to get through this together. And your children and your grandchildren are going to help us understand the benefits. They're going to help us understand the challenges of learning virtually. Simultaneously, there's another group of kids, and they're going to help us understand the benefits of being in person and the challenges with that as well. That's not experimentation. That's just being smart. You have another question?
Actually, we're out of time, 6:30. So I want
to. Can we let Dr. Newland have the last word? I'm sorry, because I didn't mean to have the last word. We'll let Dr. Newland have the last word. Hold on.
Sorry. I can't agree with more what you just, Mr. Robinson. I agree 100% with what you said. We got to make the hard decisions. Those are being made. We got to step up, understand what we're seeing and what that risk benefit is. You have an amazing community. I'll be walking right alongside you. I'll be right with you and your kids throughout this. I want to be a part of this journey with you. I want to learn with you. I'm going to keep giving you all the latest information. I look at this data on a day, all the time, all different levels of it, have these conversations with other really, really much smarter people than me that we work together. And so, yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there with your teachers. I'll be there with your students. I'll be there with your administration. So if you need me, just call me and I'll run down to Normandy in half a second. Now, it might take me longer. I'm kind of slow, but I'll be there anytime for you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jason. And I appreciate all of our families, both those who were able to be present. God bless you for that, as well as the folks who are represented in the Zoom. We're going to keep talking as this thing changes and we get more details. We're definitely going to roll that out to you and give you opportunities to come to the table and ask the important questions. Till then, we'll see you next time.